Hey guys, let's go ahead and read today's lesson on the nitrogen cycle and the oxygen cycle. You know that water is necessary for life. The element nitrogen is also necessary for life. We are going to go ahead and highlight that. So nitrogen is on the periodic table right next to carbon. Nitrogen is part of proteins, which all organisms need to stay alive. So we're going to go ahead and circle that all organisms need protein. It is also part of DNA, the molecule that contains genetic information. Like water, nitrogen cycles between Earth and the atmosphere and back again. The nitrogen cycle is shown above. Okay, so we're going to come back and take a look at that picture in just a couple of minutes. From the environment to organisms. You learned earlier that the atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, 78% nitrogen, right? Plants and animals cannot use the form of nitrogen that is in the atmosphere. Now, we can breathe in the oxygen that we need directly from the atmosphere, but not nitrogen. How do organisms get nitrogen into their bodies? The process that changes nitrogen in the atmosphere into nitrogen compounds that living things can use is called nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen from the atmosphere is changed into a different form with the help of bacteria that live in the soil and water. These bacteria take in nitrogen from the atmosphere and change it into nitrogen compounds that other organisms can use. So we're going to go ahead and highlight that. So these bacteria take in nitrogen from the atmosphere and change it into nitrogen compounds that the other organisms can use. So directly it's going to go to the plants. So plants and other organisms take in this changed nitrogen from the soil and water. Then animals take in the nitrogen when they eat these plants and other organisms. From organisms back to the environment. Okay, so here we see how it goes from the atmosphere down into the soil, and there's bacteria that converts it so that the plants can use this usable form of nitrogen, and we get it, the organisms get it when we eat that plant or when we eat organisms that eat that plant. Okay, so from organism to the environment. How does nitrogen from living things return to the environment? Some types of bacteria can break down the tissues of dead organisms now because there's going to be nitrogen trapped in the plants and in the animals. So when they die, then there's going to be bacteria that's going to return that nitrogen back to the soil for the plants to be able to use again. And then there's also bacteria whose job is to return it back to the atmosphere. Okay, so some types of bacteria can break down the tissues of dead organisms. So those are going to be our decomposers. These bacteria help return the nitrogen in the tissue of those organisms to the environment. You see these bacteria at work in the decaying log or a rotten apple. Nitrogen also returns to the environment in the waste products of organisms. Manure is a waste product of organisms. Farmers often spread manure on their fields as a way to provide nitrogen for crops, since that cow ate the plant and the grass or the leaves or whatever it ate that had nitrogen in it from the nitrogen fixing bacteria. So there's nitrogen in that cow, and then in its waste, right? And then there's going to be bacteria who's going to break that down and return it back to the soil. Okay, so let's take a look at this picture here. So what we've got going on is let's start out right here with nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. Okay, so we have nitrogen And it's actually N2. So there's two atoms of nitrogen bonded together to be the gas form of nitrogen. So lightning changes nitrogen in the gas. Okay, lightning changes nitrogen gas in the atmosphere to nitrogen compounds. The nitrogen compounds fall to the ground when it rains. Okay, so that's how we get it from the atmosphere to the ground in the form of water when it rains. Okay, so then we've got this nitrogen seeping into the soil here. This when attached to that water, right? Okay, so nitrogen compounds are in the soil. There are nitrogen fixing bacteria on the plant roots convert this unusable nitrogen in the soil to nitrogen compounds, to usable nitrogen compounds. So those are going to be on the roots of plants. There's these nodules. And whoops, there are these nodules. And on these nodules, there's bacteria. Inside these nodules, there's bacteria. Okay, so, and it's that bacteria on legume plants, on clover. There's several plants that are nitrogen fixing plants. So nitrogen fixing bacteria on plant roots, okay, so right in here on these nodules, convert this unusable nitrogen in the soil to usable nitrogen compounds. All right, so then now what we've got some nitrogen compounds in the soil. Okay, so then what are we going to do with them? Okay, so they're sitting there and the plants are going to take them in. Plants are going to take in and use the nitrogen compounds from the soil. Okay, so for its use, for its growth, it's going to use these nitrogen compounds. All right, so then we've got some plants growing up here. Okay, and some grass growing here. All right. So we've been able to get the nitrogen from the atmosphere down into the soil. It's an unusable form until the nitrogen fixing bacteria on these legume plants, on these nodules, on these roots, convert it to a usable form. All right, so then we've got these nitrogen compounds in the soil that the plants use for its growth. And then here we go. We've got animals that are going to eat those plants. Okay, so in this situation here, we've got these cows that are going to eat this grass. So the cows are getting the nitrogen that it needs for its building block, for its DNA, for its protein. Okay, so we would get the nitrogen directly from eating a plant or eating an organism that ate that plant. Okay, so decaying organic material and animal waste return nitrogen compounds to the soil. All right, so we know we've got this cow here, and we know that we've got some waste here, right? So that waste and that cow is going to have, it's going to be nitrogen rich. So we're going to have some bacteria decomposing, breaking down the decaying organic material, whether that be a flower or grass or a tree or a cow or its waste, and we're going to return the nitrogen back to the soil. Okay, so then what happens is that we have some bacteria in the soil that's going to convert the nitrogen compounds into a nitrogen gas, which is going to be released into the air to start the whole process over again. Okay, so nitrogen gas in the air with lightning, it changes it to a compound, it rains down, it gets soaked into the soil where we've got some nitrogen fixing plants. We've got some nodules on its roots are going to convert it into a usable form, because prior to that it's not usable. The plants are going to use that for its growth. We're going to eat directly on those plants, or we will eat organisms that ate those plants for us to be able to get our nitrogen. And then we have the decaying organic material. We have bacteria is going to be breaking down that and returning it to the soil, where we have other bacteria then that are going to release it back, change it into a gas, releasing it back into the air. So round and round it goes. It is a cycle. Alrighty. So the other cycle that we have is the oxygen cycle. There's not nearly as many steps in with this oxygen cycle. You learned that organisms need water and nitrogen. Yep. Almost all organisms also need oxygen for cellular process that release energy. Almost all organisms need oxygen. Oxygen is also a part of carbon dioxide and water. So if we look at the chemical symbols for carbon dioxide and water, we see that oxygen is a part of both of those. Oxygen is also a part of carbon dioxide and water, substances that are important to life. The picture below shows how oxygen cycles through an ecosystem. Okay, so we've got oxygen in our atmosphere. We know that there is about 21% oxygen in our atmosphere. Will be for oxygen. That's 2 oxygen atoms bonded together. Then we have our 78% is our nitrogen gas, right? Okay, so we've got this oxygen that's in our atmosphere that we are able to breathe in directly and use directly. So animals and other organisms take in oxygen gas from the air. When we breathe in oxygen. So then when we breathe out, our byproduct for that, for cellular respiration, will be carbon dioxide. So animals and other organisms release carbon dioxide into the air. Okay, so we breathe in oxygen, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. So who needs that carbon dioxide? Plants need carbon dioxide. So the plants are going to take in the carbon dioxide as part of their process for photosynthesis and as a byproduct. So they're going to take in this carbon dioxide from the air. They're going to use the carbon dioxide and the water and sunlight to make glucose, make food for itself. And it is going to, a byproduct for that is that it releases oxygen through its leaves out into the atmosphere. So we've got oxygen back up into the air for us to breathe. We breathe out carbon dioxide that the plants can use for photosynthesis, and they release oxygen as a byproduct. So round and round and round it goes. Most of the oxygen in the atmosphere comes from photosynthesis. That's important to know. Let's go ahead and highlight that. Earth's early atmosphere probably did not contain oxygen gas. Certain bacteria evolved that made their own food through photosynthesis. Oxygen gas is a byproduct of photosynthesis. Over time, other photosynthetic organisms evolved. The amount of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere increased. Photosynthesis is the main source of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere today. Humans and many other living organisms take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide during cellular processes. There are many other relationships between different types of matter in the ecosystem. So let's go ahead and highlight that. that humans and other living things take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide during cellular process. Okay, so that ends that for today. We will pick up and read the carbon cycle tomorrow. So make sure you fill out your outline notes for these two sections here on the nitrogen cycle as well as the oxygen cycle. So let's take a look at that. So we have the nitrogen cycle here. And, whoops, we have the oxygen cycle here. Okay, so get these two sections in your outline notes filled out, and I will see you tomorrow.